The reason why I'm here is to tell you different ways to make your project, a little bit more interesting while working inside the confines of the assignment. The reason why people in general everybody finds symmetry to be very pleasing. It's something everybody is very comfortable with because people are symmetrical. If you look at your person that you're sitting next to, you could pretty much divide them right down the middle. Even though you only have one nose, you have two nose holes. So that's why a lot of things in nature are very symmetrical. I brought some examples of symmetry that you might find around in nature. Here's half an apple, which you can see the apple is very symmetrical. It's like everything has been cut in half. A lot, not all, but a lot of flowers are symmetrical. They're very, again, it's all that something has been divided in half. A lot of times when you're doing artwork, you're trying to throw off that symmetry. That's a lot of what artwork is about, is to be able to throw off that symmetry, because it'll make people look at one thing more than another thing. That's why when you do flower arrangements, they always say to use an odd number of flowers, not an even number of flowers, because you're trying to throw off that balance a little bit and make it a little bit more interesting. I brought this cool umbrella because I just think it's cool. Again, this is a very symmetrical looking, thing that if you divided it in half, each side is exactly the same. So I think if you thought in your head about everything, things around you, the way I got my stuff this morning to bring is that I didn't really, spend a lot of time. I wanted it to be kind of, spur of the moment. I work best that way. So I just walked around my house this morning and started picking up things in my house that were symmetrical. The umbrella, the flowers, this little star that my kids made, the apple, and this glass vase, all very, very symmetrical. Throughout the ages in art and architecture, they had stuck to the confines of everything being symmetrical. Another thing that I brought from my house is this picture. And since you guys are doing stained glass window, or the stained glass window effect, I thought that this would be a good thing to bring. This is the cathedral at Notre Dame in Paris. And years ago, when they were building all these fancy old churches, they would build them very, very symmetrical. They would be exactly the same on this side as this side. I mean, this building from the front, from the side it looks different, but from the front you could divide it right down the middle, and it's exactly the same. If you go inside this church, the same thing is true. It's exactly the same number of pews on this side as on this side. So everything is just cut down the middle. And I think that's because so many things that you find in nature and yourself are symmetrical. Could you put up the first slide for me? Here's an example of a butterfly. Butterflies are a very good, actually this one's a moth because of the little furry antenna. That's one thing I know about that. Butterflies and moths are a very good example of symmetry because of the balance. Here's another one. Because of the balance of the wings, one side is equal to the other side, okay? So you're going to be working with, Mr. Hebert has asked you that your pieces be symmetrical, but one way that you can add interest to this symmetry is by using different colors. And the colors can kind of pick up and add interest to something that if you just did, black and white, might not be as interesting to look at. Another example of that would be when people do quilts. Myself, I don't know why anyone would cut up perfectly good fabric just to sew it back together again. But who has the time? But that's a very good way. That's a very good example where they've used color to make it more interesting. If you had all beige fabric and you hacked it up into little pieces and then you sewed it all back together again, that wouldn't be as interesting as picking out all those individual colors. Another example of an artistic way that people do quilts is that friend of mine who does lots of quilts says that true quilters will always put a mistake in their quilt. They'll do one thing that throws off that symmetry. Can you show the next slide? Now, the reason I bought this picture of the baby cheetah, besides that he's totally cute and looked much better on the magazine cover, is that, again, here's another example of symmetry. He's cut right down the middle. He's the same on one side as the other side, right down to two teeth that match. Now, in this case, the contrast to the symmetry is his tongue. When you look at that picture, don't you just want to look at that tongue? Because in everything in the picture, in the cheetah, is one side is equal to the other side except his tongue sticking out. So that draws your attention to that. I brought one other example of that, and I'm hoping that you can see it. It's this picture of the polar bear. My son Jordan loves polar bears, so we have lots and lots of polar bear pictures and animals at our house. But in this picture, the photographer, in this case, has this polar bear who is very symmetrical looking. He's the same one side down the other as the other. But then to finish off, if he had plopped that polar bear right in the center, it wouldn't be as interesting as but then he adds these graduatingly smaller polar bears, okay? So, where you're going to have your leeway in your drawing that you're going to do for the windows is you're going to have your leeway is going to be in the color. Can you put up your next one? Okay, so here's a color wheel, which again, looked much better on paper. You can see that, okay, who can tell me what the primary colors are? No, try somebody else. Anybody know primary colors? Yeah? Yep. Red, yellow, and blue, right. So these three, let's see where to go. This one, and this one. So there are a lot of different color combinations that people use. You could use those three colors, the primary colors, the yellow, the red, and the blue. Okay, that's often used in children's bedrooms. You ever see kid furniture where you don't want everything pink or everything blue? You know, because years ago you didn't know what kind of baby you were getting, one or the other. So you would see a lot of kids stuff, you know, that was the primary colors because it was a safe bet either way. You can use three colors from the color wheel, but it doesn't have to be the yellow, red, and blue. You can sort of go off one and go yellow, orange, red, violet, and blue, green. Okay, so that's one formula that you can use when you're doing something with color, is to use the three colors equally spaced on the color wheel. Okay, another form of color that you could use for your presentation would be, you could use all like what's called a monochromatic color scheme, which means that you're going to use like all these colors, all the colors from yellow to red. Okay, so you're going to basically stay in this side, or again you could go red to blue, but you're using one set of colors. Okay, now the way you could jazz that up a little bit in your presentation would be to use all of those colors, you know, all of these colors, but then maybe throw in, you know, this turquoise green in one spot or two spots, you know, again, you have to have that symmetry, but that's going to have the viewer kind of look at it and go, oh, that's a little bit more interesting than just all different colors of yellow. Okay? Another group of colors that you can use together is called complementary colors. And these would be colors that are across from each other on the color wheel. So that's why a lot of holidays have those very big contrasting colors, like Christmas has green and red. Those colors are directly across from each other on the color wheel. Easter, which is coming up, the traditionals for colors for that are purple and yellow. Again, that's another set of complementary, in this case they call it violet. But that's another set of complementary colors, okay? So that's another you know, combination that you can use. That's going to give you, if you use those two colors that are across from each other on the color wheel, that's going to give you the most contrast. Just like black and white stripes, that's going to give you a really high amount of contrast, okay? So you have to sort of play around. Do I really want, a really high amount of contrast? Perhaps assignment, you may not want that much contrast. You may want it to be kind of a color family and not just boom, 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 boom with a different, totally opposing colors, okay? So that's why it might be better to go with 3 colors or 4 colors that you like. A combination that I always like is, which is just is throwing it just a little bit off this complementary one here and one here. It's turquoise and red. I always like that combination together. It's not quite as strong as using the red and the green, but it still has some contrast, okay? The last thing you can do is you can kind of go for a mood or a feeling in your piece that you're doing. Let's say you want it to be very hot and fiery, and then again, so in that case you might use the reds and the yellows and maybe a little black thrown in there here and there, and that's going to be very hot, fiery, kind of presentation. You might want it to be very calming, something you might see in your bedroom, waves. So you might go with more of the blues and greens and yellows to make it more, like going to the beach or something like that. So it's just, when you're doing it, I would suggest that you just do, you pick your theme, what you're going to do, but then throw in something that's just going to throw off that color just a little bit. That's what's going to make your piece interesting, is to keep within the confines of the assignment, yet try to pick colors that are going to just sort of, tweak the viewer a little bit, to just sort of throw it off so it's not quite what you expect it to be, okay? The last thing that I want to talk about is when you're going to do your project. Mr. Agar says he hasn't quite figured out how you're going to do the project yet. He's still researching that, but I wanted to do one thing about how, they always say, oh, do your own thing when you do art. Well, sometimes, neatness counts. Even if you're pouring paint, you want to have a certain amount of neatness, and I'm always I actually teach little kids most of the time. That's my job, is I have little kids that I teach, and you're going to be amazed how hard it is to teach people this. Okay, so let's say we're just going to use circles. Okay, when you're going to go and you're going to color in what you're going to do, yeah, it's a big area. Let's color it in like this. Okay, but that's going to be, especially for what you guys are doing, the graphs, that's going to be very, very distracting. What I'm always trying to get the little kids to do is to use short strokes of the pencil and color it in with even intensity on the surface that you're drawing. Not pushing harder or softer. You want it to make the color very even. Okay, and so even if you're up to 2 in the morning the night before because you've procrastinated. Yeah, I have a teenager, I know about that. You want to make sure that you in your presentation that you're doing work that's not going to distract from the overall picture, okay? Colors that are unevenly applied and or great big huge hashings back and forth with the pencil are going to distract from your piece of art. So you want to do it where all the lines are going in the same direction and you have the same amount of pressure, so you can make your piece look better that way than it being all crazy. Okay, so I guess that's about it. Do you have any questions? No questions.